I am pleased to welcome Carrie Geraci from Jackson Hole Public Art. Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Carrie, in case you didn't know, through Jackson Hole Public Art's been pretty instrumental in two projects at the museum. One is the really cool sculptural bike racks that Ben Roth made for us. That was funded through Jackson Hole Public Art, as was the underpass, the Ravens sculpture by, what was his name?
Don Rambat.
Don Rambat.
Called Sky Play.
Sky Play, which is a fun name. I don't know if you have anything more to say about those two pieces.
Actually, the museum and Pathways co-funded the bike racks. And Pathways through interpretive funds as part of that major construction project, and some private donors funded Don Rambat's work, and he's primarily a bird artist, and he's a conservationist, so he was just tickled to death to have his work be placed here at the base of the Wildlife Art Museum. So thank you all for having me today. I am so honored to be here. I love this museum. It's such an important part of our community, and I am the director of Jackson Hole Public Art. I founded this organization in 2010 after working at the Center of Wonder with Bland Hoke for a few years, Bland Hoke Jr., who started installing temporary pieces throughout our community. I went to an Americans for the Arts public art convention that year and just decided that this would be a great idea for our community. We have such incredible lands and views and beauty surrounding us that our built man-made public spaces should be pulling in some of that art and creativity that our artists and the artists you represent here at the museum are so capable of enhancing. So we started the public art program. What we do today is we advocate for a percent of capital projects being constructed by the town and county to include public art. We wrote public art guidelines for the town that are voluntary. A lot of communities have a percent for art ordinance. Our town does not have that. The town and county do have a land development regulation that says if you're in the downtown, you can trade public art for landscaping. So if you're in a place where landscaping doesn't really make sense right on the town square, you can have artist-made benches or something to that effect. So we work in that capacity, and we also were just donated the art spot from the Center of Wonder, where Bland and I, Bland created that, but we managed it under that nonprofit, so we have that. We also do a couple educational programs. So we have a mobile design studio, and we take it to neighborhoods in the summer where we know there's a lot of kids left home alone, kids taking care of other kids. And we not only create public art projects in parks and public spaces, but we work with Whole Food Rescue and Teton Literacy to provide free books and food. And then this image right here is our STEAM program. You probably all know STEM, core education. When you add art and design, you get STEAM. And Bland Hoke, our artist on staff, works in the fabrication lab with high school students, and they address current issues through public art installations. So this project was working with Grand Teton National Park and Subaru on their Zero Landfill initiative. A temporary work of art that is now at the high school. So we do permanent and temporary installations. This summer you'll see a pavilion that's going in on the Center for the Arts lawn. It is a temporary installation. It's a sculpture, but it's also a place for informal gathering, performance, classes, etc. So one of the reasons I'm here today is because Jackson Hole Public Art created a public art and placemaking toolkit that we released 2 Junes ago. The National Endowment for the Arts Rural Placemaking site has it online. The Americans for the Arts shared it, and we got a little bit of attention. And I was invited to or elected by my peers to be on the Americans for the Arts Public Art Council. So that's a national council. I'm representing rural, small town kids, and so I now have this interesting, very educational opportunity to work with some of our country's top public art administrators. And so I'm honored and excited to do that, and I'm learning a lot. We have a monthly call and an annual meeting, and I was in DC in January. And so advocacy is something I've had to do to get public art off the ground. I did not have a core group of funders that came to me and said, let's start a public art program. It was kind of the reverse. So let's go ahead on the next slide. So that's why I'm here today talking about art and advocacy. What I would say wholeheartedly is I am preaching to the choir. You are all arts advocates. You volunteer your time. You buy art. You love artists. You bring your friends to events. That is some of the most incredible and important advocacy work you could possibly do. So how can you take that just a step further? Next slide. So I wanted to talk about where arts funding comes from, that comes from the national, state, and local level in this community. Some of you may know a lot of this already, but the National Endowment for the Arts budget is approved annually by Congress. It's about $150 million. It's been more, it's been a little bit less. But why is NEA funding important to us? Well, they send $700,000 to the Wyoming Arts Council. The Wyoming State Legislature puts in $1 million into that budget. Teton County receives close to 20% of all the grant funding from the state. And for the museum, that is maybe a $10,000 to $20,000 grant, so it's not going to make or break your organization. But these funds in Wyoming are matched at approximately 1 to 38. So what development directors do is we take this investment and we bring it to our patrons and supporters, and we say, look, we got this great grant, can you help us match this? And then we're able to do some really important programming that may not happen otherwise. It's also really important, I think, for our local officials to see this type of funding coming into our community. If your organization does receive an NEA grant, not even the funding that goes through the state, but a direct grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, those grants are very heavily reviewed. The chairwoman herself reviews all the ones that are recommended for funding. It's a prestigious award to receive one of those grants, and it certainly is a great thing to celebrate. It's a great thing to talk about, and I think it's really, it's just really amazing how a little bit of funding can snowball into a lot of funding, and that's why we want to pay attention to what's happening at the national level. If we have, the ability to contact any of our senators or representatives, certainly they've been here before and they know the value of this museum to the community. And also our state representatives, there's always talk every year about, a few people say, let's just cut the Wyoming Arts Council funding, or let's not fund the Cultural Trust Fund. Those funds are incredibly important. Another thing that we can keep our eyes on is what's happening with arts education, which is really important to all of us, because if children aren't taught the core essentials of art and design and creativity, they're going to be less successful, but they're also our future supporters. They're our future art lovers. So paying attention to what's happening in the local schools is really important. How many people know that 6th graders don't have art this year? Okay, so that was something that just got cut at the state level and the local level. And that is, it was a space issue, it was a bunch of different issues, but also creates opportunities for organizations like yours and mine to step in and to help and make a difference when it's really needed. So let's go to the next slide. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I believe that was one of our town councils a couple of years back. You know, there are a lot of opportunities. I just touched on national and state. You know, when the budget cycle is happening, you know, pay attention, check in a little bit. Call Michael Lang at the Wyoming Arts Council and say, are there any bills I need to pay attention to? Should I call any of our representatives? And with your hat on as a docent, as a volunteer, as a supporter, you actually carry, and a voter, you carry a lot of clout. So, so locally, I would say the annual budget cycle is happening right now. There is a small amount of funding that the town and county set aside for the arts. Everyone can apply for funding. You can go to that meeting and make a public comment. You can go with your name tag on. You can go carrying a print of a beautiful painting from the museum to remind everyone how important the arts are, that we have access to the arts every day. And this is the town and county funding funds these two things. So there's social service grants, which Rachel's going to talk about a little bit. The arts always butt up against, well, we need social services. We need to take care of our seniors. We need to take care of our, you know, young people, our housing. And Rachel's going to talk about that conversation a little bit. But believe it or not, the arts apply through this social service grant cycle. The Cultural Council is given a chunk of arts funding to administer. The Center of Wonder helps that grant cycle, and as you all know, the Community Foundation of Jackson Hole has a very robust grant program. So when you are working with your elected officials, I think one of the most important things I've learned is to start off by saying thank you. Their job is not always super fun, sitting through town council and county commission meetings, dealing with residents who are very upset about certain issues. They're there because they care about the community, so thank them for their service. You can email them suggestions, you can email them articles, you can email them, most importantly, invitations to your events. Give them a special spot at the table. Give them some recognition at the event, and they're going to start feeling and seeing the power of the arts if we have them at our events. And then I would say there are a lot of businesses that support the arts. Think about the banks that have wonderful paintings, or Persephone Bakery, who invests in local artists' work. Support those businesses and thank them and you know, share your love for the arts. So those are some simple ways locally. In terms of what's happening statewide, I love to go to the Business Over Breakfast that happens in January, put on by the Chamber of Commerce. Our elected officials are there. You can ask them questions about current bills. They tell you the state of what's happening. And it's a great opportunity for art supporters to just stand up and say, thank you for funding the Wyoming Arts Council. Thank you for supporting the arts. And to be present, to show that there is an arts community here. So nationally, even as an individual, you can join Americans for the Arts. And I'll show you that website a little bit later. It is a great website with tons of information. It is our national arts advocacy arm of work in this country. So, you know, there are organizations that support cycling and transportation, and Americans for the Arts does the work of sending the message out to our elected officials and our nation, as a whole, of why the arts matter. And then there are lots of great articles and reports, some of which are put out by foundations like Kresge, Ford, McKnight, that talk about current issues in the arts, and they're actually wonderful to read. They're very, very interesting. A few years ago, there was one that talked about getting in on the act. And what that meant was that millennials want a different type of experience. They want to be part of the experience. They want to be making things. So lo and behold, the museum then started doing mixed media nights. I don't know if you all read that report and said we've got to get millennials involved this way. But knowing about these articles, reading about them, and just having some interesting information in your back pocket is always super handy if you are out advocating for the arts. Next slide, please. So, what I like to remind all of us arts organizations, we are so lucky because we create images, we create beauty, we create art. So we have this powerful messages that we can show people, not just tell people. So use images, use pictographs, use creativity to make the case for the arts, not just written reports. Make it personal. Have a story. If you know you're going to the business over breakfast and you're going to go shake Mike Garu's hand, tell them a story about how the arts have made a difference in your life. Tell them about a young person that maybe you sponsored their music lessons and what that did to their grades. Make it emotional. Our elected officials like to have the economic impact statements, and we can provide those as well. But if you have a personal story to share, how many times have we heard elected officials talk about those stories? Have a little story in your pocket to share, and just remember, we're about creativity. Use creative ways to share the story. So this is a great example. This is an infographic created by Americans for the Arts. That's the same information, which sticks in your brain better. And this isn't even a great infographic. It doesn't have people with paintbrushes and paintings and frames, things like that. So those are just some suggestions, really just skimming the surface of what you can do to be an arts advocate, but I will say you already are one, and what you do is amazing with all the volunteer time and support you provide for the museum. That's great, and it's invaluable, and organizations really need people like you. So next slide, and then we can just keep going. So these are websites you can find online that you can look at. The National Endowment for the Arts has a lot of great information. Next one. And then let's go ahead and actually flip to the Americans for the Arts website is pulled up on here, and I'll just show a quick... Is that the next slide, or is that... No, it's... Rachel, do you want to help with that? Yeah. I'm just going to show you that website super fast. There's an advocacy button on there. If you are interested and know, for example, that you are going to Washington, D.C., and you might be at a dinner with Senator Barrasso, you can click on Advocate. You can go online here. If you're a member, you have access to even more information, and you can see current articles, there's facts and figures, all this different information about working with elected officials, an advocacy toolkit, and these are easy to read, different bits of information that are just great and very helpful. And then if we can, if we can go back to my presentation, I'll just give you a couple examples of what you might see on there. So, okay, if we can go to the next slide. One more, there we go. So this is an example of an infographic that they have on their website. How can you support the arts in 2018? Contact your representatives, go to Arts Advocacy Day. Anyone can attend that. I haven't been, but I think a contingency from Teton County going, from the museum, from the Center for the Arts, small organizations, big organizations, would be very powerful. It would be very informational. The vibe in DC is just so fun and exciting when you're there to be an advocate and, you know, to go have a meeting with some of our representatives. You can call them. Again, Senator Enzi has an office right here. His office assistant is lovely and friendly and so nice. You can call her and say, I know the vote is coming up for the National Endowment for the Arts. This funding really does matter to our community. You can look on the Americans for the Arts website, pull up a couple statistics for Wyoming, and just leave a message or have a short conversation. You can write them letters. You can do all different things. These are just suggestions if there's a town hall. Again, how could the arts show up on force to a town hall and, you know, have a very creative presence there and make sure that everyone understands how important this is. Let's go one more slide. So these are just a few other examples of, you know, the information that's on the Americans for the Arts website. Simple to access, simple to execute. It takes a little bit of time, but again, if you're sharing a personal story, there's no right or wrong answer. You're taking a moment because you care. You're respectfully contacting one of your representatives. And the more we all do this, I think the more it can make a difference. So that's all I really have for today. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer questions. If you have any suggestions for the public art program, I am always available. I had a citizen stop in my office yesterday and sit down and chat with me for half an hour about public art for the landslide, which we are very interested in creating something there because it's a lovely engineering project, but it could use a little art. So anyway, my office is right in the Center for the Arts. Carrie at jhpublicart.org. You can email me. I'll get back to you. I'm happy to meet here for tea or coffee.
So when I was just starting to kind of do some research on arts advocacy and what kind of interesting things we might talk about today, I stumbled upon this article called The Arts Ripple Effect. And I just thought it was interesting to maybe discuss or think about. I love all that Carrie has to say about emotional responses and having personal stories. I think that's really important. And I think as artists we're good at that, that whole emotion and passion and really portraying that I think is important. But this has kind of another twist on it, if you want to do the next. So as she mentioned, the arts unfortunately are an easy target for cutting. And so while most people really feel positively towards the arts, we could maybe benefit from changing the conversation a little bit to motivate action for the arts and kind of move away from this idea that art is nice but not necessary, because I think we all feel that it is necessary, and so arguing that point can be tricky. Next slide here. So instead of looking at art as just a form of entertainment, which is really easy, kind of a trap to fall into. It's entertaining, or a transcendent experience. It's important to well-being. It's a universal human need. Where these things are all true, they may be harder to argue. So this article was saying that we need a message strategy that positions art and culture as more of a public good instead of just a private sort of individual concern. So the study that I found in this article was done in 2008 by the Fine Arts Fund in Cincinnati, Ohio. And they found that one sort of approach in communication stood out as maybe having the most potential to convince people when advocating, and that is that a thriving arts sector creates ripple effects of benefits throughout the community. And two ripple effects were especially helpful and sort of compelling arguments. The first was a vibrant, thriving economy. So neighborhoods are more lively, communities are revitalized, tourists and residents are attracted to the area. And the second is a more connected population. Diverse groups share common experiences, hear new perspectives, and understand each other better, which is really part of the museum's strategic plan too, in diversifying, and I think that's a really interesting point of bringing people together to bounce ideas off each other, and that's important. So it's kind of a simple idea that shapes the conversation in important ways, sort of moving us away from the me and the passive consumer being sort of vague, emotional, and moving us more towards us and as a community, a more public concern, more clear, still emotional, but also practical. Let's see. So as part of the study in Cincinnati, when asked how would you explain to a friend or an elected official perhaps why the arts are important, this 49-year-old man, a salesperson from Akron, I thought answered the question well. He said the arts can bring together a diverse community, allowing people to meet and exchange ideas. The same people might not otherwise have met or been inspired to communicate their ideas, visions, and goals with each other. All of this can spark economic growth in an area and lead to new buildings and a sense of excitement, which can in turn lead to more tourism. So basically, the impression that I got from this research is that no matter how much we value the arts for their own sake, that as supporters, we kind of also need to point to practical or tangible benefits when you're discussing the issue.
So what I'm thinking is, in terms of Jackson Hole Public Art or the Wildlife Art Museum, as an organization, institution, nonprofit, can we be an advocate?
That's a great question. So yes, as long as you don't spend a huge percentage of your time doing advocacy work. So you are not a hired advocate. You are not in Cheyenne advocating the elected officials during the budget session. And if you want a precise ruling on this, call the Community Foundation. Karen Coleman can tell you exactly how to define advocacy versus you would be providing education. You are not an advocate. So you are, but you're providing education. If you don't do this full time, you're educating.
And then, just in terms of our membership or your funders, or are you advocating to them to get involved as well?
Occasionally, I will ask people that are supportive of public art to show up at a town council meeting and to say, we support this project or we support this process. I think it's really important as an organization that your staff is communicating with your volunteers and your members to say, this is very important for us. We would love for you to speak up on this issue. And that's an important distinction. What this group of people can do is, when you're thinking about your elected officials, they're your peers, and you're talking to them peer to peer. And you're not necessarily saying, advocating and saying, I want you to give, $1 million to the National Museum of Wildlife Art. I'm talking more generally about you're explaining to your peers why the arts matter. And if those peers are elected officials, I think that's great for them to know. So there's a big difference between, you know, advocating for, let's say, a percent for art ordinance, which we may do later this year. And just in general, advocating for the power of the arts. So that's a great question, and it's an important distinction. And there may not be any serious issues coming up facing the museum in the near future that you need, you know, a bunch of people with signs and protesters showing up. It's more of that peer-to-peer advocacy is what I'm talking about, just sharing those stories of why the arts matter. So very different and good distinction. Any other questions? Yes?
The Americans for the Arts, I mean, I understand we're an art museum and what we're dealing with, but does it involve other types of arts? Theater, drama?
Oh
music?
yes, extensively. Art in education, art in healthcare and military. It involves art and business partnerships. It has a public art network. There's a few different networks, but the Americans for the Arts Conference is in Denver this year, and you will see the whole gamut of the arts world show up. So theater, dance,
Carrie,
music.
when is that?
It's in Denver, and I believe it's the second week in Denver. So,
Second week of what?
oh, I'm sorry, June. Thank you.
Has anyone from the museum gone to that? Not that I know of.
It's a close one this year. I'd highly recommend it. The Public Art Pre-Conference is what we go to. It's a couple days before, and it's you know, very specific to art industry. And I've stayed for the beginning of the regular conference, and it's a lot of hoopla. It's very interesting and exciting. So, and informational. There's lots of little breakout sessions where you can go learn a lot. So there'd be some museum-specific ones. There'd be some performance-specific ones. So.
And is that a relatively new organization, Americans for the
No.
Arts?
In fact, there's a great piece on their website that talks about how it came about. I'm not going to get this right, but I believe it even started before President Kennedy. And initially a council was appointed, and then that slowly grew into what is now the NEA, and then, you know, the Americans for the Arts kind of split off. So there's the funding and then the advocacy, which have to be separate.
Maybe you can speak to this. I'm a little confused. I understood that NEA funding was cut exponentially this year. Is that true?
No, the President Trump has proposed eliminating the budget.
Just altogether?
Mm-hmm. And it's $150 million. So of our country's spending, that's a pretty minuscule amount. It's pennies, but as you know, that snowball factor of what that does, how that little investment grows and grows and grows as it goes through the Wyoming Arts Council, as it lands here, and other donors come to support a grant. It's important to our community and our communities, you know, all across the country. And I know I don't need to preach to the choir on the power of arts education and how important that is to youth. So, yeah, so we don't know what's happening this year.
Proposal, right?
I still put in a grant to the NEA. I'm always optimistic. It won't go away. But again, one of our senators last year was quoted as saying, "I don't know what the National Endowment for the Arts does." That's why, peer-to-peer, those conversations mean something and they go a long way. So, yes?
I might add, both our senators and the member of Congress have been briefed in depth. So that
Excellent.
statement's not totally accurate.
That was last year. I don't know about
Yes,
this year.
yes,
So,
yes. But that is
Excellent.
an ongoing
They had to.
response.
awesome.
No, nothing.
Yes.
The National Endowment of the Arts, hopefully, if they've been under attack many times
Yes. Correct.
by conservative elements.
Yes.
Hopefully, we'll be able to get it back quickly if it goes.
And And that's just a proposed budget.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Questions?
What about other public art projects in Jackson that you're working on for this summer? What's cooking?
So the pavilion project is cooking along. We'll probably install that in May. And any,
What's the pavilion?
the pavilion, we did a local call for artists for a work of art that would be a sculpture, but also a gathering place. So not a traditional bandstand. It looks a little bit like a Richard Serra sculpture from one angle. So you'd see all these panels that form a circle, and then from the other angle, it's completely see-through. And the Center for the Arts has given us a Creative in Residence grant. We raised the rest of the budget. So these big, tall panels, it's called the Town Enclosure, will be in the center of the field, and any nonprofit can take their classes out there, they can have practices out there. It's not enclosed, it's an open air venue, but it'll also look very beautiful with just shadows and light, and kind of looks like a big sort of, not Stonehenge, but it was inspired by the town enclosure in the Tetons, Western corrals, but the key part is nonprofits can use it for free and have.
Will there be any kind of signing up for it?
Yes, you call the Center for the Arts. I would suggest calling Carrie Geraci. So that's great. So we're doing that. We'll have the mobile studio out in some neighborhoods this summer. We are also working on starting a glow festival, so artworks that glow that will be installed out in Teton Village from November through February. A lot of communities do that. Yeah.
So just, since I don't really know what that is, the first thing that comes to mind when you say the glow, it's like, well, that happens at night. And so if there's this dark sky initiative, how does that affect dark skies here?
Yes, so it's mostly in Teton Village, and these are LED type installations. Bland did one called the Beacon this year, so LEDs are pretty low light emitting, and it's a temporary installation just for 4 months. I believe the base area is pretty well lit at night, so we're not contributing to that, but for example, we do follow the Dark Skies Initiative with Willow Grove. That installation turns off at 11 o'clock, and again, those are very low emitting LEDs in that installation. So we do try to pay attention to that. Yeah. So we'll have the pavilion out there. We'll have the mobile studio out there. We'll start doing more art spot installations. And hopefully we will, we have a project pending for the North Cache Gateway area at the Fish and Wildlife at the National Elk Refuge, and they're doing an environmental assessment there, but it's a wildlife viewing platform that's kind of an experiential art piece that will be ADA accessible, created by an artist, but can be used for environmental education, like Feathered Fridays. You can have kids and people out there. Yes.
There's outdoor in the meadow, I assume that's right to the north there?
At the Center for the Arts?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that going to interfere with Shakespeare?
No. Nope, not at all. And in fact, I believe Claire has already signed up to use it for a small event, kind of a pre-Shakespeare event. So no, it is set on, I think it's Hanson Street, on that access of Hanson and the Center for the Arts. So it's set back. It won't interfere with gala tents, with Shakespeare, with any other of the programs that are out there. So, and it's up for 1 year at this point. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks everybody.